Thank you, Don. And hello, everyone from cloudy London. Thanks for joining us. We're going to try and whiz through this because, as Don said, there is quite a bit. So quickly, let me just, well, not so quick. Let me tell you about Upside Learning. We're essentially headquartered in India, but we operate around the world. As you can see from the map, we work extensively across the clients across the world. We spent a lot of time in mobile learning. So let me just kick this off quickly with a poll on how many devices do you use in a day? 1, 2, 3 or more. Be interesting to see.
Yeah, it couldn't be a simpler poll, could it, to us? So it's very straightforward. So you choose your answer. I don't think we have any other polls in the question. Actually, we don't have an option for none. So if you use no devices during the day, let us know. Although obviously you're on a device at the moment, I think it's rather unlikely. But please do share the information with us. And at the bottom, we've got that question: what operating system do you use? Well, please feel free to share that information in the text chat area. Rohan says can't see a submit button. I'm not sure you need to. I think everyone else is voting. We just choose your answer. You should be okay. And it looks like, in terms of the platforms and the form factors that people are talking about here, a lot of Windows and Android coming through. That's interesting. Let's just look at the results of the poll, shall we? And perhaps that's predictable. The vast majority of people are using, Alan, 3 or more devices in the course of the day. That's certainly true for me. And we can see from the answers in the text chat area, very few people are answering with simply one operating system. Almost everybody's got a slew of different operating systems they're working with. So presumably that feeds into what you're going to be talking about today, Alan.
Yes, absolutely. I think it leads very nicely onto the fact that, we look at almost 75% people are using 2 or more devices, and therefore, brings us really into the context of today in terms of we're living in a multi-device world. We're going to be talking about, responsive learning and e-learning. And what are the challenges and considerations? This is, really our journey, and obviously Geera will take you through that part of it, but we are living in a multi-device world. Everybody has already said that 2, 3 devices are the norm today, really. But let's look at some quick research from the US. This is by Pew Internet, where it said 91% of American adults had cell phones, 55% had smartphones, 42% tablets. But one surprising stat in this was, 25% of these people only use the mobile to access the internet, which is not something you come across very often, but is certainly seems to be gaining momentum. But it's really, and going on to the next one, it's about really the context of usage. We've got all these devices, and Google did this research back in 2012. It's really about what device do you use when, and it's always in the context of what you want to find. Maps is a great example. If you're on your way to find a restaurant or to a meeting, you come out of a tube station, out comes your phone. You won't take your laptop out. So really, it's more and more about when you need something, what you're going to use, but you use it across all your devices. Again, coming out of this was what we call sequential screening, which is you might start something on your cell phone or tablet, but you might finish it on your PC or desktop, typically during the course of a day. But, we very often, and I'm sure when you think about this, you'll find yourself doing it all the time. So again, 98% move between devices of the same subject through the day. 2 quick quotes, one from Eric Schmidt at the Gartner Symposium, where, he said what they're seeing from Google's perspective was more people and more enterprises now moving to mobile devices. Jerry Veen, who is the author of a book on responsive web design, talks about the fact that every day the number of devices the number of platforms, browsers, OSs, and we've already seen that in the poll earlier. Responsive design has become quite a fundamental requirement for what we do in learning. It's been around in web design longer than it's been in e-learning. But I think given where we are and given the adoption rates of mobile and tablet, we're certainly going to be having to produce more and more of this on a day-to-day basis. Again, if you look, at what is responsive, a screenshot, and I'll quickly demonstrate something here as well. But if you just look at the visual here, you will see how the screen actually scales to the device. And if I can quickly share my screen, I can illustrate this very quickly. And I'll do it by using our own website. And if you notice the logo and the menu bars at the top, as well as the visual, as I drag this, as I drag this and make it smaller, the screen and the visuals will scale. The menu is now in here. It's dropped down. The products have all been put in a single column. So really this is the essence of what we're going to be talking about today in responsive design. And if I just go back quickly to where we were. So responsive design really is, when your content and everything else scales to the device it's on. We have a couple of questions here for you before we move forward. Really, what's the experience currently with responsive design?
Yeah, and I think you've got three questions here, but it all boils down to one thing, doesn't it? Where are people at the moment with this idea of responsive design? Doing it, planning to, thinking about it? Is it something which you might feel you have to do whether you like it or not? Interestingly, while we've been talking, Alan, we've been talking about what sort of things people are accessing on their mobile devices, and Amit has said, look, think resources, not courses when it comes to mobile. Donald Clark's making the other point that people are going to the internet less to access formal courses, more to access materials, the exact information they need at a particular time. Anyway, very quickly, could you let us know what are you doing at the moment? If you are designing if you are designing online materials, resources, and/or courses of any time, where are you with it? Are you using responsive design at the moment? Let's have a look at what people have to say. Mobile learning theories, says Richard, also emphasizes the greatest freedoms and opportunities for learning through mobile, etc. Short burst, anytime learning. Yeah. Donald Clark saying he'd like to do it, planning to do it, would like to. Okay, enjoying the headache of getting middle to work. Okay, so it's a little bit like teenage sex. Everyone's talking about it. Nobody's really doing it very much. So, Alan, you're going to tell us how we can do it. Is that right?
Well, I'm going to rely on Geera to do that. But yeah, so quickly, what do we mean when we say responsive e-learning? It's really about e-learning that responds to device size and scales, your content, presents the layout, looks at all the elements on your screen and scales it to the device you're using it, basically ensuring that the user experience is, effective, engaging, and we don't lose anything. We've all been in that situation where you've got your fingers and you're trying to stretch the screen to zoom in to actually look at something. I think this, really in a nutshell does that for you. So you're never going to have to squint at the screen again, hopefully. Again, a few questions in terms of, we've talked about it, and it's already been there in the back chat of what would you actually use it for, what kind of, is it courses, is it resources, etc. I think the question is, do you think responsive design would really make your e-learning better? Again, if you can use, the chat channel on that.
Of course, better is a rather difficult term to define here, but certainly if if it's impossible to use on a phone, then that renders it useless. So it'll certainly be better if it's if it's actually available. Very interesting. So, I suppose what we're trying to gauge here is there an interest? Is there a reason for thinking about responsive design? Having said that, we had plenty of response earlier with people saying they were interested in thinking about it quite seriously. So I think we could probably take the answer as yes, it's something we need to know more about. And Stuart's saying yes, when we look at creating learning spaces and moving away from the entrenched view, the learning takes place in certain spaces. So in other words, being responsive is probably essential if we want to try to get access to these people, because guess what? They're going to be using the mobile devices anyway, and if we're not there, they're going to be looking at something. So let's try to make sure that we're reaching people with the resources, as Amit says, that they need. So I think probably, yeah, it would make it better. I think it's probably inevitable. Back to you, Alan.
Thanks, Don. Okay, so, quickly, again, let's just look at why responsive learning. I've seen some of the comments. It's already talking about there is an enhanced reach, higher uptake. Because it's single source design and all your content's in one place, it delivers efficiencies, consistency, easy maintenance, and you can track and move things across devices. And as we said earlier, you're also looking at sequencing where multiple devices are used across a period of time, inevitably and invariably on the same topic. So that's where I'm going to now bring Geera in, and what she's going to talk about is, given this whole aspect of responsive design, we set out to build a solution for it, which we called FRED, which is Framework for Responsive E-Learning Design. We're going to take you through our journey and some of the pain and some of the discoveries that we made along the way. So to take you from here on to the end is my colleague Geera, who's coming live from Pune in India. Geera.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for getting up to speed there on responsive design and responsive e-learning. So yes, it has been an interesting journey. It's not over yet by far, but there were several challenges along the way, and I think in sort of struggling to find out the solutions to those challenge areas, we sort of discovered or came up with several key considerations that applied or could be useful for responsive e-learning design. So we thought we would share our pain and also some of those considerations with you. So we'll be going through 4 main areas: browser, operating system, and device combinations, usability, content display and treatment, and then development process at the end. So I think the first challenge was quite simply the sheer number of combinations that was possible, that you could possibly have. It's as if, the minute you say multi-device or the minute you say responsive, it's as if it has to work on every possible device out there. And while there will definitely be a wide range of devices, it's still important maybe to try to narrow down the scope as far as possible, just to get more specific devices and configurations. Or maybe try to say that these are my list of primary devices and configurations based on perhaps, the devices that we use the most or that are most popular or something like that. So we did that, and why is it important to do that then? It's because the learners will view our e-learning through browsers. So now how do we know what browser they are using and what device they're on? Every browser will send something called a user agent string, which carries information about itself and also about the device on which it's running. So that user agent string then will tell you what is the combination that's running, basically. So why it's important to know that is because browsers can handle and display content a little bit differently. They can interpret it a little bit differently. So when we're talking about responsive design and we're talking about the challenge then of how to display content, that same content either in exactly the same way or what to do to it to display it in a similar manner, but then you still want to achieve and pass the same message across all browsers. So as a programmer, you would need to then know for every browser which browsers are you targeting, what are those combinations that you're targeting, and for each one of them then, what is that unique user agent string that would be returned. And then you need to see how to code differently depending on the browsers. So we have a small example here. Supposing it was Safari and Chrome, or it were Mozilla. So you can see there's a slight difference in the line of code. So this is just to say that, even though you want to achieve the same thing on both these or all three of these browsers, you're still having to, one is detect which browser it is, and then know that to achieve this particular thing, I need to write code differently in this way. And so catch and handle each one of these conditions. Here's another example. Now in this case, I think on the left-hand side, it's IE7, an older version of Internet Explorer. And on the right-hand side, it was Mozilla 25. So in the screenshot on the left-hand side, you can see that there's a white rectangle and three more translucent rectangles after that. And obviously, they've gotten misaligned. So visually, then, you're bifurcating your text, so it's not looking very nice. Plus, it's sticking out at the end. So that's, from a visual point of view, there's an inconsistency. Plus, in this case, what so happened was that these white and translucent boxes were hotspots. So they were meant, to create those interactive rectangles to go into different areas of the course. Now, because they got misaligned in IE7, the interactivity also didn't work properly. So it becomes, just simply because of browser differences, it became a visual inconsistency and also a function inconsistency. So that's why it's so important to, detect and know what is that configuration, device and configuration that's running, and also then what are the different ways in which or how browsers can differ in terms of the properties and elements that they handle, and then how to deal with that. And once you know all that, I think with responsive design, another important aspect is about the testing. So we found that testing was a longer process. It was more complex. It was more intricate. And again, just because of the sheer number of permutation and combinations that could be there. We also chose to test on actual target devices, primary devices. So yes, we did try some simulators. They can be reasonably helpful, maybe for testing certain things. For example, on a simulator, you can see text alignment, for example. But then you may not be able to test everything with 100% accuracy. And there were also certain things that we couldn't test. So the minute you talk multi-device and responsive, obviously there are tablets, there are smartphones, those are all touch devices. Through a simulator, I could probably show a tablet on my desktop screen, and using the mouse, I could test functionality on that tablet. However, there's no way using the simulator for me to really have that tactile experience of what it's like to do that touch interactivity on a touch device. And if there's any tactile feedback also that comes in, that's not possible to test. So again, we decided that we really wanted to test everything, the framework and the templates, especially being the first time that we were trying to create this framework using actual devices. We found another challenge related to browsers was specifically lower browser versions of Internet Explorer. So IE6 is planned to be phased out, sometime this month in April 2014. And IE7 and IE8, their usage is also declining. But what we tend to find still is, that there is demand for IE8. And possibly that might come from viewing responsive as an extension to desktop learning, because it's still relatively new as a field. And so, we tend to sometimes hear that, okay, we'd like our e-learning to run on desktops, and also it should run on tablets, and we may as well have it run on smartphones also. But as long as that desktop remains one of the target primary devices, we do expect that IE8 is going to continue to remain one of the target browsers. But so what's the I don't want to say problem. The issue with that is it doesn't support HTML5. So in that case, if that is the browser that is detected, again, we need to take care to think up alternative treatments or fallbacks and handle all the instances of IE8. Okay. So we found that using a mix of HTML4 and HTML5 helps to handle both older and modern browsers. So the HTML4 will take care of the older browsers. And even though we did do that, we also thought that we could include a system check right at the beginning of our courses. So something like this, where you test all the specifications, and if your browser does not meet the specifications, then that information is passed back to you. What we chose to do was, rather than have the learner have a suboptimal experience, we thought if you're not meeting the minimum specifications, we won't allow that course to run. Another way we could have, of course, handled that is to display a message and just tell the learner that, you can go ahead and view the course, but you may not have the optimal viewing experience. Template-wise also, again, by using the mix of HTML4 and HTML5, you can then take advantage of HTML5 properties on supported browsers. And on browsers that are not supported, then there are alternatives. So, for example, here, on the left-hand side, what you see is a carousel template. That's on a modern browser, which supports HTML5. So that there are angled planes, and the interaction would have a sort of a rotating animation when you click the arrows. Now, the browser on the right is IE8, so it doesn't support HTML5. So then what happens then, it becomes a click-through type of interactivity. So you can see it loses that sense of depth, and it has lost that rotation also. So when you, here in this case, when you click, the pane simply gets replaced. Another difference here, again, which you can see is on the left-hand side, there's a sort of a glow around the elements. On the right-hand side, it's flat. There's no glow. That's because, again, that glow property is not supported. Is an HTML5 property, so it's not supported by IE8. We also designed templates. Then, we had to think of what fallback to give. So we gave Flash as a fallback for videos and for lower browser versions. And then since we knew that we were targeting Internet Explorer 8, we of course made sure to test on actual devices running IE8. I think with this sort of multitude of possible combinations, another thing that we realized came into play was video and audio formats, because these are again browser dependent. They can be browser dependent. So, for example, Opera doesn't support MP3 and MP4. So supposing then Opera is the browser that's detected, we would need to load OGV or OGG format. So we found that converting our videos into MP4, OGV, and similarly audios into MP3 and OGG allowed us to cover most of the browsers. Just one point here is that, by doing something like this, we were essentially creating 2 versions of every video and 2 versions of every audio file. So that definitely increases package size. So again, from an e-learning point of view, that can become a consideration because some LMSs may have limits on upload package sizes. So just something, we realize we have to keep in mind here. Okay, moving on to usability. From usability point of view, touch friendliness immediately, is the first thing that comes to mind. And from touch friendliness point of view, I think 2 very important aspects are the size of your interactive elements and their positioning in terms of how close or far they are from each other. If they're not large enough to grab comfortably, or if you crowd them too close to each other, you're already increasing the chances of grabbing the wrong one by mistake. Or even if we say, perhaps from design point of view, we want to have smaller icons in size. Still keeping more space between those icons then helps to make sure that you don't accidentally grab the wrong one. That can sometimes cause debate, because then you have the design aspect that comes in. So perhaps the designer might feel that smaller icons or icons that are closely grouped together would look sleeker, they'll look nicer. But yes, that really needs to be balanced with that usability factor then. With touch devices, again, because it's going to run on non-touch and touch devices, another thing possibly to keep in mind is to add alternative navigation for the touch devices. So, for example, here on the desktop, this is a scenario template. So this particular story was divided into 10 scenes, and you could navigate through the scenes by clicking any one of those buttons below the scenario. Or there are also left and right arrows that you could click. So that's for the desktop. Now, exactly the same thing, this being an iPad, dimension-wise, exactly the same thing will fit. And you have those two modes of navigation. In addition to that, what we did was we chose to introduce a swipe gesture here to navigate between the scenes of the scenario. So that's again something to keep in mind, to see what could you add in terms of navigational options on the touch devices. We did not choose to have swipe to go through pages in this case, but had we done that, then we would need to make sure that anything that we introduce at page level doesn't clash gesture-wise with that page swipe. So perhaps then, we would have needed to think of an alternative gesture. So for example, maybe one finger swiping for changing pages, in which case it could have been two fingers swiping for going through the scenario. And from touch friendliness point of view also, it's important to keep the layout in mind. So another example here. The tablet on the left, if you see, this is a drag and drop interactivity. And there's a whole bunch of drag elements in the bottom left corner. And some of these then need to be dropped into the drop spaces on top. Now, if you go strictly by space, the same fits very well onto a desktop, right? So you don't necessarily need to alter that to be able to fit it onto an iPad. But then on a desktop, you're using a mouse, and so you have super accurate aim. You can point and you can pick up easily and then drop them. On the iPad, it was difficult. We found it difficult to pick up, to get a hold of those and to pick them up. Very often we would end up grabbing either the one above or the one below. So what we realized is that even size-wise, if it's fitting, we still needed to think about an alternative layout, which is what we have on the right-hand side, where if you see, we have increased the space between the drag elements, which makes it then a lot easier to sort of get a grip on them to drop them into the drop areas. And in order to, because we used up that space on the right, we then made the adjustment of reducing the gentleman standing there to a sort of a portrait photo. Okay. We also, from usability point of view, we also needed to think about navigation. I think just like Alan showed us on the website, some of the controls get grouped, some of them get layered depending on the screen size. So we have to think of similar things then for our course. Do we want to shift the navigation? Do we want to group it? Should we layer it depending on maybe things which are more commonly used, required, not required? So we came up with the responsive menu and also chose to hide some of the controls depending on the device that we used. You see here on the desktop and on the tablet, the menu is at the bottom. When you get onto the phone, the menu shifts to the top, so that no matter how far you have to scroll, you always have your navigation options available to you at the top. And if you look at the number of options also, we've reduced them here. So we've just kept the most common menu options at the top, and the others have been layered. So there are two additional icons that have come here. And information in these icons then, one is the menu, and the other is a second layer of navigation options, the glossary, the resource, the transcript. So these are all still global navigation controls or global features, but they may not be so commonly required. So we chose to put them then at a secondary level. Again, usability, because of the difference between interacting with the mouse and interacting through touch. Another thing we realized was we have to take care of our instructions. So there were 2-3 ways in which we sort of thought about, how should we do this? So one is to have completely device neutral instructions. So maybe select the button to view the examples, for example. So that technically, if you just listen to that sentence, select the buttons to view more details, that works. You would know what to do on a touch-based device. You would know what to do on the desktop. With the word select specifically, one thing that did come to mind was select in terms of, interaction with the computer is a very specific meaning. It has a very specific meaning. It should mean to select from a list of options. So maybe when you select from a list of radio buttons or checkboxes, or you select from a drop-down list or a list box. So while it can work, and we do use it, just again something to keep in mind, especially if you happen to be doing something related to applications where select would then have a very specific meaning. So not to confuse them then. Other option we had was to have device appropriate instructions. So in that case, then the instructional designer has to remember to write 2 instructions. So maybe, click the button to view more details and tap the button to view more details. And then conditionally, depending on that device which is detected through the user agent string, you display the appropriate instruction. What we really wanted to try with Fred is to go in for some task-based instructions. So here's an example of that. Just watch the video to learn about the steps to improve customer satisfaction. So there's obviously a video icon there with the play button that's easily recognizable. So we didn't feel that we necessarily needed to say click the video or click the play button or tap the play button. So things like, watch the video, read through the examples, look through the examples, explore the activities, things like that. So those are also nice ways to write instructions. And especially if you look at how, when we use our tablets and phones, we're just used to exploring, trying things out. We don't necessarily then need such precise instructions. One last thing that, we debated a lot regarding usability was text readability. So many different device sizes and resolutions. So text size was going to change. The higher the resolution, the smaller the text would appear. So what we found is that by using a font size of 16 pixels, we achieved good readability on all the device sizes. So here you can see we've zoomed up the text that you would see on the smartphone. And we put all the devices together and we said yes, at 16 we're able to read. Another option could have been then to go in for dynamic proportional text sizing. Again, that is more efficient because once you change one thing, everything else will change proportionately. You don't need to change absolute values every time. Most of our devices would have font size settings, device settings. So we also found then we wanted to check the effect of that. We found that changes that we made to the font size, through our device settings, they didn't necessarily affect the size of the text in our e-learning. So that's why we also chose to include accessibility settings then within the e-learning. So options to increase the font size and change the font color and the background color for contrast, maybe for better readability. We decided that was also something to include into e-learning. Okay. From content display, content treatment point of view, we've been talking about how to fit content then onto different sizes of devices. And in responsive e-learning, yes, we do need to transform the treatment. One is simple layouting, so adjusting into a different layout depending on the device size. And the second aspect could be that you actually change the treatment. You transform the treatment when you move on to smaller devices or when you change devices. So again, as instructional designers, we had to think about, at storyboarding stage itself, what is the content and how is it going to fit, how do I need to change it then for each of these different sizes. And I need to change it, but at the same time, how do I keep a consistent look and feel, and how do I try to have a user-friendly experience in all cases. So something like this typically. On a desktop, a horizontal process flowchart with horizontal arrows. That can get squeezed to a certain extent, but then beyond the point, it can no longer be squeezed. So we would have to change the orientation and find some other way to handle it. If it were a branch flowchart, it would, you can't just change the orientation. Maybe we would have had to make it interactive in some way in that case. And then changing the orientation is one thing. The second thing again is remembering to change the orientation of the arrows as well. So we wouldn't want to end up with, on the phone, having a process steps that go vertically, but then still have the arrows sort of on the right side of each process step pointing horizontally. So again, these are things that while storyboarding we have to keep in mind also. Another example, very often labels. We have labels. We want to point to things. We want to label things. We even have speech bubbles, maybe in scenarios. And so again, when we resize, we want to retain that correct information, that correct relationship between the labels and the visuals which are depicted on screen. So we would have to take care of shifting maybe the position of arrows, shifting the position of labels, and just keeping our eyes open for all that. I think there was one instance we had a scenario. So we were using speech bubbles, and the speech bubbles have a stem that points to the speaker. So we created that, and then we were resizing that to a certain extent until we hit a particular breakpoint. And we realized while we were resizing, the text in the speech bubbles was also wrapping, and we were sort of changing those. But nevertheless, at one point we ended up with the stem of a speech bubble pointing to a glass on the table or something like that. So again, little things like that, but you need to be very, very meticulous, even while testing also, to catch things like that. So we created some templates then for content presentation, for maybe knowledge checks and questions and interactivities also. And the templates then, as we created them in such a way that they handle those transformations that we decided that we wanted. Another aspect in terms of content display when it comes to responsive learning is images or visuals, how to handle images and visuals. So is it okay just to keep reducing the size of an image? You'll reach the point at some point where it doesn't make sense anymore. The image is just too small. You can't see what's inside it. So there were some options again that we considered. One is scaling, yes, up to a certain point. And then perhaps if that image happens to be a supporting image, drop it beyond a certain point. So it doesn't display on a smaller device. Another option was cropping, in which we identified the focal area of an image. So we said this is the most important part of the image. So this is the part that we should always be able to see. So in that case, what we do to resize is to crop around that image, or around that central part, sorry. So even though the size is decreasing, the display size is decreasing, that central part of your image still remains at a large or a relatively large size. And how you're reducing size is by snipping around the edges. And the third way then is a combination of those. So I'm just going to share my screen for a minute. I hope you can see this. The word cloud is an image. And now
I can't actually see anything at the moment, Geera, to be honest. I can see a spider saying, wait, nothing's happening. I'm going to give it...
And now?
Yeah, we can see your word map.
Okay, good. Right. So this word cloud is an image. So as I resize the browser, you can see it's getting smaller. So this is pure resizing, but you can still see the entire cloud. You can see the edges and the central message, which is customer satisfaction. At some point, which is here, at some point we crop a little bit from both sides. And between this and this point, you can see that the cloud size has actually become bigger again, because this is going to be on a smaller device. So keeping the central customer satisfaction in a larger font or a larger size and cropping around the edges. And again, we keep decreasing then this cropped version, and then we crop it further. So here we snipped a bit more off the edges, and again it's become a little bit bigger, and then we keep going like that. So that's an example then of cropping and sharing. Sorry, resizing.
Is that it, Geera?
Yes.
Okay. Get you back to your slides. There we are.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and to make our development process smoother, we are also working on some storyboarding templates that match the templates. And in those then there will be, features, or the instructional designer will be able to then say, should an image be resized, or is it not okay to resize it? Should it then be cropped, and what's the central area? So a little earlier we did talk about transforming content treatment depending on the target area. And one of the things again that came up here was with HTML technology, sometimes there can be some constraints or some restrictions. Very often with e-learning, we want to tell a story. We want to show an example. We want to have an animation. We want characters in there and environments and places and, people with dialogues and things like that. And all that then needs to be closely synced with audio. So in HTML, not that it can't be done, but it would be difficult, it would be tedious, and it may not be that effective. So what we decided to do in such cases was actually to create those animations and sync them in Flash, and then publish them as videos in whichever formats they needed to be published in. So here's an example of that. So these are then Flash-created videos, and they're getting called within the HTML framework, and the videos are getting resized then depending on device sizes. In addition, we also debated quite a lot about the audio strategy. Again, with e-learning, we're quite used to having audio narration, and it works well. Supposing you have a desktop computer, and you say, I'm going to have a red circle in the top left corner. Then I have a blue circle in the bottom right corner, and then they're going to move towards the center, and they'll merge, and they'll become purple. And at the same time, if this is happening in sync with narration, which is explaining it, you have a completely coherent image in front of you. So whatever you're seeing and whatever you're hearing is matching. Now, same example. Imagine if we took it onto a mobile phone, a smartphone. And if there was some introductory text, but maybe in the initial view, you could still see that red circle. Now the audio starts to talk about the blue circle, but there's no place to show the blue circle. So you have to end up showing the blue circle below the red circle, which is not visible to the learner. So how on earth is the learner supposed to know that I should be scrolling up now to see what this animation is all about? They're going to be hearing about something that they cannot see at the same time, so it would be very confusing. So for that reason, we did debate this, and then we decided to go in for introductory audio only. So just to use a little bit of audio on each page, and where we really felt we wanted that narration, we wanted those dialogues, then we went in for those Flash animations where the audio was synced within the Flash animations. So a variety of multimedia, which we can use for responsive e-learning, audio, video, we've already discussed, images and graphics, and different types of animations. So a couple of additional options here. We can use sprite animations for short looped animations, and scalable vector graphics or SVG animations, again maybe for short and simple animations. Just a caveat here is that not all browsers are going to support the SVG format. So again, either browser dependent, you decide whether to use them or not, or maybe create them alternatives to be used or to be called where SVG is not formatted. So we ended up using sprite sheets for our menu. So here's an example of what a sprite sheet would look like. Okay. We also spoke about layering. That one is resizing, relayouting, and the other aspect that comes up is layering of content for smaller devices. So again, because we're still finding that desktop is a primary device, and so it also run on tablets, also run on smartphones. Well, we said we'll keep interactivity layers on the desktop, maybe 1 to 2 levels deep, not too deep, because we'll be adding interactivity layers then when we go onto the smaller device. So we don't want it to become too deep or too intricate on the smaller devices. So we did a first level of content chunking for desktops, and then where required, a second level of chunking for the smaller devices. So again, I'm just going to share my desktop. Okay, can you see that? Sorry. I hope you can see that.
Yep, we can see the image introduction with those sort of keyhole.
Okay, I just thought I'd check. Okay, so here's an example of an interactive page. So at level 1 on the larger display, you got the definition of these concepts, and at a second level of interactivity, we have the videos, the animations that we talked about earlier, the flash animations. Now, as we scale this down, we can squeeze up to a certain point, and then we've layered it. One more layer has come in. That happens around here. If I were just to close this again, this is what we would see if we loaded the page on a smaller devices. So there's one layer of interactivity right here. So I need to click to view the definition, and then click again to view the example in each case. Another example was the scenario one, which we'd seen earlier. So here again, to click through these to see the scenes, and gets resized up to a certain point, and then beyond that we decided to remove the interactivity in this case. So rather than, we layered it down, so to speak, and changed the presentation. So we made it into something like this, depending on what's important. So here you can see the speaker, you can see what they're saying, and we've also added these narration boxes outside of the visual. So let's just go back here. Something like this. Seems like Alisha really enjoys having lunch with Matthew. Here, this is actually within the scene itself. But when you go onto the smaller device, we have to take them out of the screen, because again, as you keep wrapping, the size of that text box also needs the space to increase. So if we had put it on top of the visual or within the visual, again, at some point it would have overlapped. And in this case, doing something like this worked because if you look at the nature of the scenario, the story that's being told, we don't necessarily need to know the details or see the details of what's within this environment. So it is okay to drop that environment beyond a certain point. So this may not necessarily work in every case. So again, that's something that as instructional designers we have to keep in mind, because if we need the details of the environment in the lower size devices, we might need to think something else.
Just one quick question. We had a question from Helen just asking, in that particular dialogue that you have going there, which we all love the responsiveness, by the way, is there audio, is audio included as part of this story, or is that separate? Is it just visuals and text?
No, there's no audio as a part of the story. So the page, when it loads, it would have a couple of sentences of introductory audio, which just set the scene, and then you read through the scenario.
I thought so. Just wanted to clarify that for Helen. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead, Geera.
One more example here. Again, first level interactivity. In this case, text. And again, when you drag that down at some point here, it gets into 2 levels. So I need to first click to view the definition, click to view the example, and then I can toggle back, or I can toggle between the example and the definition. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen now.
Okay, by the way, Geera, we're collecting a huge number of questions I need to throw to you as well, and we have 5 minutes to go. No pressure.
Right, absolutely. Okay, almost done. Second last, I think. So I think Alan did discuss this, or did ask a question about this, about, do you really need to show everything on every device? And very interesting question, and to which at least we think that the answer is no, not necessarily. You don't necessarily have to, and you may not necessarily be able to. So there may be certain things that just don't lend themselves, or they may be technically possible, but then it wouldn't be very effective on a smaller device. So typical example is simulations, software simulations. You have these, big screenshots, assuming of course it's a desktop software, and you have these demos or these interactive exercises where people have to try out different functions or different procedures within that software. It's important to be able to see the entire screen, to show different things on the screen. So you can scale maybe a little bit, but then beyond the point, to show that on a mobile phone may not be that effective. If you scale it completely, you can't see anything on that screenshot. Or if you say, maybe I'll make it interactive. So on click, then on tap, I will open a larger screenshot. But then I still need to pan my way through that screenshot. It doesn't give a very effective learner experience. Same thing might happen with the complex or a large technical diagram, some kind of a wiring diagram maybe. If it's really important to be able to see all parts of that large diagram, maybe because you want to explain something about parts in relationship to each other, you want to explain, something flowing through a particular chemical process, something like that, you have to be able to see the whole thing. So if that is the case, then such an animation or such information presentation may not lend itself well to being displayed on a mobile device. So in that case, we would need to, I think as instructional designers, we need to be able to identify such instances in our content. And once we've identified them, then to see how do we wish to handle those instances. Same thing even with scenarios. If you want to see details of environments or objects, or even text within the scenario, difficult when it's scaled down. Or if you want to explore, you've got to find things within a visual environment. If the environment is too small, it doesn't help. Otherwise, you end up again into some kind of a combination of zoom, pan, zoom in, pan, zoom out kind of a thing, which is awkward, which is just not very user-friendly. So, yes, with responsive, definitely it's about resizing, it's about fitting onto different devices, but it's also about context, it's about the objectives, it's about the overall learning strategy. And it may not be that everything necessarily goes onto each and every device and each and every size. Okay. Last, just a quick word about the process. We found, it's slightly different from our process for creating maybe Flash-based e-learning. It was definitely a more iterative process. So, do something, discuss, review, argue, redo, and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of interdependence, and especially a lot of interdependence between, I think, instructional designer, graphic designer, and programmer. So we would, instructional designer would think of, this is what I want to present. Maybe this is how I can present it. Then consult the graphic designer, who would suggest maybe different layouts for the different sizes that we had defined. Then, of course, at some point, if you want to change the behavior, go to the programmer to find out, will this particular combination be possible? So I think because we're building the framework, building new templates, that level of iteration and interdependence, interactivity was required. Probably, as we start then being able to reuse templates, that will come down for the templates that we reuse. But I still feel that if we're going to introduce a new template, introduce a change or an update to the framework, even modify or have a variation on an existing template, it's still important to have that interdependence, that interactivity. Storyboarding-wise, we thought to focus only on core content and core visuals and drop the level of detail in our developer notes. So unless it's really vital that an image should be displayed maybe to the right or the left or above content, don't mention it. So this is the text to be shown, this is the visual to be shown, and that layouting adjustment is to a certain extent driven by the template, and then it's adjusted during production. Because we realize that if we get ourselves caught into trying to define layouts in the storyboard, knowing that there will be a lot of changes made at the production stage, we don't want to end up then at testing phase with storyboard violations. No, this is not what the storyboard says, because that's not necessarily important. It was important to know what content is going to be presented. And I think, as mentioned earlier, then testing time. Definitely a higher testing time. You've got to go through all those permutations and combinations. So that's been a summary of our journey so far. And that journey has resulted in us being able to incorporate some of these features then into our responsive framework. Of course, the framework is still evolving, so we're not there yet. I think that having the framework and also being able to go through this journey brings certain benefits. We get one of the biggest benefits is the ability to deliver the same content or similar content, again changing its treatment, but from a single source. It makes changes a lot easier and a lot more efficient. And I think the template library also is going to be very helpful, because all those transformations that we discovered, so all those pains that we went through to decide that in such case this is a transformation, in such a case this is going to be the transformation. Now those are already there within those templates, so we don't necessarily have to go through that pain again. Alan, anything you'd like to add here?
Alan sent me a message earlier saying he had to get away. So unfortunately, he ran out of the room, leaving you holding the baby, as we say.
Well, I'm just 1 foot out of the door at the moment.
Alan, any final questions? We're actually over time. We're not going to have time for questions, which is unfortunate. But is there anything you'd like to add to Geera?
No, I think certainly there's been a lot of questions on the back channel, so I'm sure there's stuff there which we can pick up possibly offline, and
I think we might have to pick it up offline, because we always run to time on these sessions. We're not going to be able to deal with it today, sadly. Geera, any final points you'd like to make? Anything you'd like to raise with people before we wrap up?
No, I think I'm done.
Fantastic. I have to say, food for thought barely covers it. We thought that we knew about reactive design, responsive design. I don't think anybody coming to the school had, well, obviously we haven't gone into it typically with the level of detail that you've gone into. So thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. The key question that came up out of this for me was the quite intense discussion around what we putting onto devices. There was a lot of talk about mobile first. In the end, Donald Clark convinced me, I think, that there's an issue here around, can we actually have the same content available on every device? And the answer is almost certainly not on every device. So we have to think what devices we're designing for and how we can use them best, but have as much as possible across multiple devices, because as you pointed out right at the beginning, Alan, people are increasingly doing one thing on one device, moving to another device, and expecting it to be there. So plenty of stuff here to think about. I'd like to say a big thank you to Alan and Geera for sharing their experience with us, and also thanks again to everybody in the room who've shared their thoughts, their considerations, their resources today. And also, of course, Donald Clark for letting us know that he has apparently got an open badge in grumpiness, according to the text chat, which amused me tremendously, and of course it's not true. Guys, thanks very much for coming together here, and Alan and Geera, once again, thank you. I'm looking forward to being together on our next presentation, our next LSG webinar, which will be in 3 weeks' time, after the Easter break here in the in the UK and in Europe. Until then, have a great break. Look forward to seeing you in 3 weeks' time. Bye for now.